The airplane hummed softly as it began to taxi down the runway, preparing for takeoff. Passengers settled into their seats, buckling their seatbelts and adjusting the overhead bins. The flight from Dubai to New York was a long one, and most people were already exhausted, their eyes heavy with the thought of the journey ahead. In seat 14A, a woman sat quietly by the window. She was about 30, with short, dark hair, dressed in a simple black dress and a leather jacket. Her face was calm, almost too calm for someone who was about to board a flight. She gazed out the window, her eyes distant, as if her mind was somewhere far away. But there was something unsettling about her stillness, something that made the other passengers uneasy, though no one could quite put their finger on it. Tasha, the young flight attendant, noticed her as she walked down the aisle. She had seen many types of people on flights, but this woman stood out. She wasn't dressed for a vacation or business, like the others. Her posture was too rigid, too focused. Tasha couldn't help but feel there was more to this woman than met the eye. As Tasha passed, she gave Alina a polite smile. Alina's lips curved into a tight, almost mechanical smile in return. It didn't reach her eyes. There was something in those eyes that Tasha couldn't quite read, something that made her pause. But before she could dwell on it, the soft murmur of the passengers filled the air again as the flight attendant continued on with her duties. Tasha moved to the front, where the pilot and co-pilot were making their final checks. She relayed the usual announcements: seatbelts on, phones off, and the flight should be smooth. But her mind kept drifting back to seat 14A. She caught a glimpse of the woman again as she passed the aisle. This time, Alina wasn't looking out the window. Instead, she was staring at her hands, holding them tightly together in her lap. For a moment, Tasha thought she saw her eyes flicker, but it was gone as soon as it appeared. Then, just as the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they were preparing for takeoff, something strange happened. A man, in his late 30s, with dark sunglasses and a disheveled appearance, passed by Alina's seat. He looked hurried, almost as if he was trying to avoid attention. Tasha noticed him too. His movements were quick, almost too quick, and his eyes darted around the cabin, scanning the faces of the passengers. He didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned in close to Alina's seat, whispering something to her. His voice was low, barely audible over the noise of the cabin. Alina didn't respond right away. She simply nodded once, a brief movement, and then the man hurried off down the aisle, disappearing into the crowd. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Something about that exchange felt off. The man's hurried demeanor, the whisper, it all seemed strange. She tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. After all, people had strange conversations all the time. But still, she couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at her gut. As the plane began to speed up on the runway, Tasha tried to focus on her duties. She checked the cabin, making sure all the passengers were safely strapped in. But every time she passed seat 14A, she found herself glancing at Alina. The woman hadn't moved since the man whispered to her. Her hands were still tightly clasped in her lap, but now her eyes were closed, as if she was meditating or deep in thought. The roar of the engines grew louder as the plane lifted off, and Tasha continued her walk down the aisle. But the uneasy feeling never left her. She couldn't shake the image of the strange man, his hurried steps, the whisper, and then it happened. A soft beep sounded from the cockpit. A call came through the intercom to the flight attendants. Please be aware, we've detected a possible threat on board. Stay alert and keep an eye on passenger activity. Tasha froze for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced at Alina again. The woman was still sitting quietly, her face blank, but something had shifted. Tasha's suspicions bubbled up once again. Was it her? Was Alina the one they were being warned about? As the plane soared higher into the sky, Tasha couldn't help but feel like the calm before the storm. The feeling that something was wrong, something big, hung in the air. But what could it be? Was Alina really just a regular passenger? Or was she hiding something much more dangerous? The plane soared smoothly through the clouds, its engines humming as it cut through the sky. The crew moved about the cabin, checking on passengers, offering drinks, and making sure everything was in order. But in the back of the plane, something was stirring, something that would change everything. Tasha, the flight attendant, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her eyes kept flickering to seat 14A, where Alina sat motionless, staring out the window with an almost eerie calm. But what disturbed Tasha the most wasn't just Alina's silence. It was the strange whisper the man had shared with her earlier. Tasha couldn't help but wonder if it had anything to do with the unsettling message that came through the intercom. "Stay alert," the captain had said. But what did that even mean? Could Alina be the one they were warned about? Could she have something dangerous hidden on her? The thought gnawed at Tasha's mind. But as she made her way down the aisle again, something happened that made her heart race. A loud beep from the front of the plane broke the calm. The sound wasn't part of the usual in-flight routine, and it sent a shiver down Tasha's spine. She immediately turned to the cockpit, where the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Attention, flight attendants. We have detected an unusual signal coming from seat 14A. Please investigate." The color drained from Tasha's face. Her feet froze in place. Seat 14A. That was Alina's seat. Her heart pounded as she glanced nervously toward Alina. The woman was still sitting quietly, her face unreadable. Alina hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, but something was wrong. That signal, what was it? Could it be a bomb? A hidden device? Before Tasha could think any more, chaos erupted. A loud voice shouted from the back of the cabin. "She has a device." A panicked passenger pointed at Alina, his face pale with fear. "She has a bomb." The words rang out like a gunshot in the quiet cabin, and immediately the entire plane seemed to shake. Panic spread like wildfire. A woman screamed, grabbing her child tightly, while others began standing up, moving in a frantic rush toward the exits. Tasha's heart raced, but her training kicked in. She immediately moved toward Alina's seat, her eyes scanning the woman's still form. "Ma'am," Tasha said, her voice steady but laced with tension, "we need to ask you to stand up and step into the aisle. Now." Alina didn't move at first. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she stood and turned to face Tasha. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm, controlled movements. Too controlled. Tasha hesitated. Was this woman dangerous? Or was she just caught in something she didn't understand? "Please, step aside. We need to check your belongings," Tasha urged. Without a word, Alina stepped aside, allowing Tasha to inspect the seat. But there was nothing. No strange device. No wires. No bomb. Nothing at all. The other flight attendants were already working quickly, talking into their headsets and checking the rest of the passengers. The panic was rising, and some passengers were even trying to get out of their seats, shouting in fear. Tasha's mind raced. Had they misjudged her? Was Alina really the threat they had feared, or was there something else happening? The woman hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't even raised her voice. Yet, the panic continued to spread. Then, as if on cue, one of the other attendants, Carla, came rushing up to Tasha, her eyes wide with alarm. "I just checked the cabin monitors," Carla said, out of breath. "There's something under her seat. It's a signal jammer. It's blocking our communications with the cockpit." Tasha's blood ran cold. A signal jammer. That could be used to block emergency communication, to prevent the pilots from contacting ground control. It was dangerous, and it meant they were dealing with someone who knew what they were doing. Tasha's mind was reeling. She looked back at Alina, who was standing quietly by the aisle, her expression unreadable. Had she been part of this, or was she just in the wrong place at the wrong time? The passengers were still in chaos, and some of them began shouting at Alina, calling her a terrorist, a threat to everyone's safety. The fear in the air was thick, almost suffocating. "Get her off the plane." Someone yelled from the back. Tasha's stomach twisted. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Was Elena the victim, or was she the one behind this? The flight attendants had no choice but to act quickly. With the comms down, the plane was effectively isolated. They had no way of knowing what was happening outside the plane, or what was really going on. Tasha turned back to Elena. "We need to restrain you for the safety of the flight," she said, her voice shaking slightly, though she tried to remain calm. "Please, come with me." Elena didn't resist. She simply nodded and followed quietly. But as Tasha led her toward the back of the plane, Elena's voice broke the silence. "This is a mistake. You're making a terrible mistake." Tasha didn't respond. She couldn't. They had no choice but to treat Elena as a threat, at least until they could figure out the truth. But in the back of her mind, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible misjudgment. Elena wasn't just a passenger. She was something else. And whatever that something else was, it was too late to turn back now. The plane hummed steadily, cutting through the vast sky, but the atmosphere inside had shifted completely. What had started as a simple flight from Dubai to New York had transformed into a scene of confusion and fear. Passengers whispered nervously to each other, and flight attendants were on high alert, their eyes scanning every corner of the cabin. Elena sat in the back of the plane, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She was no longer the woman who had appeared quiet and unassuming. Now she was a suspect, a person to be watched. The moment Tasha had asked her to step aside, she'd complied without a single protest. She had moved quietly, but with a strange sort of determination, her gaze never wavering. Tasha stood near her, trying to stay professional as the rest of the flight attendants continued managing the anxious passengers. But in her mind, one question kept repeating. Who was Elena really? Tasha had checked the seat, finding the jammer hidden under the cushion, but there was still no sign of a bomb, no trace of anything that could explain the emergency. The signal jammer was bad enough. It was a weapon in itself. It could disable communication between the cockpit and ground control, making any coordinated action impossible. But the absence of a bomb meant that there was more to the story than the passengers or the crew could see. Elena remained quiet, her eyes never straying from the floor. She wasn't acting like someone who was guilty. She didn't seem frightened. In fact, she seemed calm. Too calm. Tasha couldn't understand it. Why wasn't she panicking? Why wasn't she defending herself? But then, Elena spoke. "I know you're scared. I understand. But you're making a mistake." Her voice was soft, but her words had a weight to them that made Tasha stop in her tracks. There was no fear in Elena's voice, only a cold certainty. Tasha swallowed hard. Was Elena admitting something, or was she trying to manipulate her? Before she could respond, the intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice came through, sharp and authoritative. "Attention, flight attendants. We've detected a foreign signal being sent from the plane's system. It appears to be coming from the rear cabin, from the vicinity of seat 14A. It's overriding our communication with air traffic control. We need to contain this immediately." The captain's words sent another wave of panic through the cabin. The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, and some passengers began to whisper about the situation. What was going on? Why had the signal been coming from Elena's seat? Tasha turned back to Elena, her mind racing. She was beginning to feel the pressure. The situation was slipping out of control. Elena's lips parted as if she was about to speak, but before she could, Tasha's voice cut through the rising tension. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to explain yourself?" Elena lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting Tasha's for the first time since the flight began. Her gaze was intense but calm, and it made Tasha feel like she was facing something far bigger than just a woman on a plane. Something dangerous, something hidden beneath the surface. "I couldn't say anything," Elena replied quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made Tasha pause. "Because if I did, you would never believe me." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. She was about to say something, but then the words died in her throat. Elena's calmness, her unshakable demeanor, left Tasha with an unsettling feeling. What was Elena hiding? Before Tasha could respond, one of the other flight attendants, Carla, came rushing up to them. She was panting, out of breath, as she looked at Elena with wide, terrified eyes. "Tasha, you need to see this." Carla's voice was shaky, but there was urgency behind it. "We just checked the security footage. Elena, she's not who she says she is." Tasha's stomach tightened. What was she talking about? Carla continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "We found something on the footage. Elena isn't just a passenger. She's an undercover agent, a CIA operative." The words hit Tasha like a punch to the chest. CIA. Her mind raced, trying to process the information. This wasn't just some random passenger with a jammer. Elena was a trained professional, a government agent. "Are you sure?" Tasha asked, her voice cracking. She couldn't believe it. Elena had given off no signs of being anything more than a quiet woman on a flight. There had been no hint that she was someone involved in something far more serious than she seemed. Carla nodded. "The footage shows her entering the airport with a fake identity, and we found a hidden device in her bag. It's not a bomb, but it's definitely something we're not trained to deal with." Tasha felt her knees go weak. This entire time, Elena had been pretending to be an ordinary passenger, but she was anything but. And now, everything made sense. The strange calm, the lack of fear, the way Elena never panicked. She knew what was going on. She knew the danger. Tasha's mind raced. What had Elena been doing here? What was she trying to prevent? But there was no time to think. The situation was growing worse by the minute. Elena was a government agent, but why was she on this flight? What was her mission? And why had she hidden her true identity? Tasha turned to Elena, her voice trembling slightly. "What is your mission? What's really going on here?" Elena finally met her gaze fully. "I'm here to stop something much bigger than you realize, something that could cost lives if it's not dealt with. But I can't explain it all right now. Just trust me when I say that you're in danger." Tasha's heart raced. What had she gotten herself into? What had started as a simple misunderstanding was now spiraling out of control, and Elena wasn't just a passenger. She was the key to something much darker. The tension inside the airplane was thick. Every passenger seemed to be holding their breath, watching the flight attendants move back and forth, whispering to each other in hurried tones. The situation was escalating fast, and no one knew what would happen next. Tasha stood frozen, her mind racing with the new information Carla had just dropped on her. Elena, the woman she had assumed was just an innocent passenger, was actually a CIA agent. She wasn't just a regular flyer on this plane. She was part of a mission. A mission that had something to do with the signal jammer found under her seat. But what was the mission? And why had she hidden her true identity? Tasha looked over at Elena, who was still seated in the back, calm as ever. There was something unsettling about how still she was, almost too still, as if she knew something the rest of them didn't. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes, their intense focus, spoke volumes. Elena was holding back, and Tasha knew that if she didn't find out what was going on soon, everything could spiral out of control. "I don't trust this," Tasha muttered to Carla, her voice barely above a whisper. "She knows too much, and yet she won't say a word." Carla nodded in agreement. "I don't like it either, but we have to do something. The plane's already off course. We need to act before it's too late." Before Tasha could respond, the intercom crackled again. The captain's voice was sharp and urgent, cutting through the tense air. "Attention, all crew members. We have just been informed of a possible security threat on board. A passenger has been identified as an undercover CIA agent with knowledge of a potential terrorist threat. We need to contain the situation immediately. Do not panic, but proceed with caution." Tasha felt a shiver run down her spine. A terrorist threat. She glanced over at Elena again, her heart pounding. Elena had been the one to reveal the first clue, the signal jammer hidden under her seat. But now, with the captain's announcement, it was clear that Elena wasn't just involved in a simple operation. She was in the middle of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Carla's voice broke through Tasha's thoughts. "I'll go check on the other passengers. You stay with her. We need to find out exactly what's going on." Tasha nodded, her throat tight. As Carla moved to attend to the rest of the cabin, Tasha slowly made her way toward Elena, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Every part of her screamed that something was wrong, but she had to stay focused. Elena was the only one who could explain everything, but she wasn't talking. When Tasha reached her, Elena didn't look up. Her hands were folded in her lap, her expression still serene, but there was an unmistakable air of authority about her. It was like she was the one in charge, not the crew. She was the calm in the storm. Tasha took a deep breath and, trying to keep her voice steady, asked, "What's going on, Elena? Why is there a signal jammer on board? Why didn't you tell us who you were?" Elena didn't respond right away. She stared ahead for a long moment, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she finally spoke. "Because telling you would put everyone's lives in danger." She paused, glancing up at Tasha with a look that was both solemn and urgent. "You need to understand that this isn't just about you. This isn't even about me. It's about the mission. If the wrong people know what I'm really here for, the plane could be a target. And not just for us, for everyone on board." Tasha's mind whirled. A target? Who could be targeting the plane? And what was this mission that Elena was so desperate to keep secret? Elena continued, her voice low, almost as if speaking to herself. "I've been tracking a group of individuals who plan to hijack this plane and use it to execute a coordinated attack. They've been working under the radar, and the signal jammer was meant to block any interference that might alert authorities. I'm here to stop them, but I can't do it alone." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Elena wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just trying to protect the people on this flight. She was part of a much larger operation, trying to prevent a tragedy that could have global consequences. "But why hide your identity? Why not tell us?" Tasha asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Because," Elena said, her eyes locking onto Tasha's, "if I had revealed myself, I would have become a target. The group I'm tracking doesn't just want to hijack this plane. They want to stop me from getting to them." Tasha's mind raced. If what Elena was saying was true, they were all in serious danger. There were people on this plane who were plotting something far more terrifying than anything they had imagined. Elena shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze never leaving Tasha's. "I need your help. I can't do this alone. There are things happening on this plane that you don't know about. Things I can't explain right now. But I need you to trust me. If we don't work together, we're all going to be in a lot more trouble than we ever thought." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Elena was asking her to risk everything, her safety, her career, her life. But there was no turning back now. Tasha had seen enough to know that Elena wasn't just making things up. This was real. And whatever was going on, the danger was far from over. Tasha nodded slowly. "I'll help. Just tell me what to do." Elena's eyes softened for the first time since Tasha had met her. "Thank you. But we don't have much time. The hijackers are getting closer, and they'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. The hum of the airplane's engines was the only sound cutting through the sudden silence. Tasha could feel the weight of Elena's words settle into her chest. They were no longer just passengers on a flight. They were part of something far bigger, something dangerous. As the plane continued its smooth journey through the sky, Tasha's mind raced. How were the hijackers going to make their move? Where were they? And how could they possibly stop them? Elena sat calmly in her seat, her eyes scanning the cabin, alert and focused. She had already reassured Tasha that she knew exactly what to do, but that did little to ease Tasha's mounting anxiety. Every second felt like a countdown to something terrible. "Stay sharp," Elena whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her mind. "I need you to be my eyes and ears. We're getting close." Tasha's throat was dry. Getting close to what? She glanced at the other passengers. Everyone appeared to be enjoying the flight, unaware that their lives hung in the balance. The flight attendants were walking the aisles, their faces trained in that typical airline professionalism, but there was something in their movements that betrayed the growing tension. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the silence, and a man a few rows in front of them stood up abruptly. "Everyone, stay calm." His voice was low but firm, and for a moment, it sounded like a normal passenger making a polite announcement. But the cold, calculated look in his eyes told a very different story. Tasha's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. The man glanced at a woman across the aisle, and without a word, she discreetly pulled out a small device from her bag. Elena's eyes narrowed, and Tasha saw her stiffen. "They've activated the jammer," Elena muttered, her tone deadly serious. Before Tasha could respond, the man's voice rose again. Only this time, it was unmistakable. "This plane is under our control now." The man's words were chilling, cutting through the cabin like a knife. "Do not make a sound. Do not try anything. We will take care of everything." There was a long pause as the passengers processed what was happening. The flight attendants froze, their expressions changing from professional to panicked in an instant. Some passengers started to murmur in confusion, while others began to realize what was going on. Elena stood up suddenly, her face unreadable. "Stay where you are, Tasha," she ordered. "I'm going to handle this." Tasha opened her mouth to protest, but Elena was already moving down the aisle. She walked with purpose, her steps confident and silent. Every movement of hers screamed authority, and Tasha could see it in the eyes of the hijackers. They hadn't expected this. The man who had spoken earlier noticed Elena's approach and immediately stepped in her way. He tried to block her path, but Elena didn't even flinch. She didn't hesitate. "I know who you are," she said, her voice colder than the steel that made up the plane's body. "I know why you're here, but I'm not going to let you hijack this plane." The man's eyes widened, and for the first time, Tasha saw a flicker of fear, but the moment was fleeting. The hijacker's hand moved quickly, pulling out a gun and pointing it directly at Elena. "You've made a big mistake, Agent," he sneered, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You think you can stop us? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and you're far from your backup. What makes you think you can stop this?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward with unshaken confidence. In a flash, her hand shot out, disarming the man with the precision of a trained professional. The gun hit the floor with a dull thud. But before Elena could make another move, another hijacker appeared from behind, rushing toward her. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest as the tension soared to an all-time high. Everything was happening so fast. She had no idea what to do, but she knew she couldn't just stand there. "Elena," Tasha called, stepping forward. But Elena was already ahead of her, effortlessly dodging the second hijacker's grasp and flipping him onto the floor. She moved with the kind of grace and strength that only someone with years of training could possess. It was clear now that she wasn't just any CIA agent. She was a force to be reckoned with. But even as Elena subdued the hijackers one by one, Tasha knew the danger wasn't over. There were still more of them scattered around the plane, and the jammer was still blocking all communication with the outside world. They were flying blind, and the stakes were higher than ever. In the back of the plane, another hijacker reached for his own weapon, and for a split second, Tasha thought it was over. But Elena was quicker. She darted toward the man with the speed of a predator, knocking him unconscious before he could even get a shot off. The cabin was now eerily quiet, except for the heavy breathing of the passengers and the occasional rustle of movement. The hijackers who had been subdued lay scattered across the floor, but there was no telling how many more were hiding among the passengers. Elena looked back at Tasha, her expression grim. "We've taken down some of them, but there are still more to deal with. We need to act fast." Tasha nodded, her mind spinning. She was in the middle of a battle she hadn't signed up for, and yet there was no turning back now. She wasn't going to let these hijackers take control of this plane. Not when lives were on the line. The real fight was just beginning.